always up for a late night raid, though I wouldn't know them by a name or a face. We fight like brothers in a war with the dark elf race. In a dying age, I live in dungeons. Dungeons.
All right, welcome to NycosRPG. I had to time out my lead-in to my music. I'm trying to get that all figured out. Today we're going to be making stuff up. Well, I've been making it up for 50 years, and so why stop now? You know, so far it's been good. There's a joke there. I'll tell it a bit later. But we're going to talk today about a subject that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and that is the reason people play. And today we're going to talk about, in particular, what I call Jankins, Yolos, and murder hobos. There are those people who come to role-playing for a specific reason, and that is they honestly have no idea what's possible in a role-playing game. They don't know what the parameters are for a fantasy. After all, perhaps they haven't done really a lot of fantasy thinking, dreaming, imagining in a really, really long time. And so they have no framework. And then there are others that come to it with a very clear framework, and they know that in a role-playing game you can do things that you as an individual would never do. And the third group, of course, are those that go into the fantasy setting specifically to do things that they know that they would not allow themselves to do in this world, and yet they want to somehow viscerally connect with that other part of their being. And while they're not the same, don't let me conflate them in your mind. A person who comes to the world to see if they can break it, someone who comes to the world to see what's possible, and the third one where they just want to do stuff that they wouldn't otherwise. They're not the same, and we have to learn how to handle them. And today my thought process was, instead of trying to scheme through what I want to say and build out a very definite platform, instead, I would look at this more along the lines of a true conversation. Now, if you are watching and want to be a member of the conversation, feel free to make a comment in the comment section. I'm actually actively watching that should that come up, because I want to be proactive with that. But if not, reach out to me through our comment section or even through direct message and tell me what you role play for. What is your motive? Because today, when we're talking about these through, I'm not going to be talking about it from the standpoint of the players and how they react to it, but rather as the guy behind the shield, the storyteller, game master, director, whatever term you prefer. I prefer game master or director, but of course in many cases director's too vague, and there are too many people who do directing in film and motion pictures and even audio recordings that they would look down on me for using the term. But once you know a bit more about NycosRPG, you could possibly see why I would do that. So today I want to just converse with you mano a mano in this room full of potentially millions of people, of which I haven't seen that many yet. But I want to talk about how I've handled these persona types before. And I wrote some notes here, but those are more for me than they are for you, and I only put them up there because they kind of give you an idea of where we are in my train of thought. And it really isn't a discussion of the evolution of a game master directly, but there are aspects of it that do take on that kind of a perspective, because we as game masters do change our minds over time, and even our perception itself shifts directly under us, sometimes without us even being aware that we've made the change. But and if you try to figure out what I'm doing, we're looking at the reflection of my glasses and trying to make sure that I'm able to see you through the glare, so to speak. But when you are a initial stage game master, or you are new to role play in general, it's awfully hard to know what where the lines are, so to speak. It's not like a board game where it says you have to move so many squares and you only have so many actions. Oh, wait. There are people that do that now, but okay. So that was a backhanded comment about my the current crop of game masters are, if they're saddled with the Dungeons and Dragons 2024 or even the 2014, they do have a lot of those kind of limitations if they have gone to the point of the tabletop for miniatures games. But when you're a beginning game master, you are as clueless, if you will, as the players are about what can and can't be done, and so you spend a lot of time with the rule book open in front of your face, frantically looking through for something to explain to you how to handle these odd and sometimes extreme conditions. But so what you have to do at the beginning really is what I did, which is basically you just run with it. The players, since they come for all the various reasons, some of them are not compatible, but you don't know that from the very beginning, especially if you aren't briefed on the use of a session 0 and you haven't got the breadth of experience that a more veteran game master might have. And so you have to just run with it. The players are going to ask to do the things that they're going to ask to do, and you either find a rule for it or you make up a rule for it. And my recommendation is the best you can do in those circumstances is to just run with it. The key rule, I suppose, in improvisational humor is the concept of yes and, wherein you take the statement that is made, and no matter how ridiculous that statement is, you accept it, and then you describe a further addition to the scene or a condition or a situation that occurs. Like, for example, I want to run across the deck of an airship during a rainstorm, and I'm going to leap for the railing to catch myself before I go overboard. Okay, then that's what you do. Is you determine what kind of a dice roll is going to be required, and let the chips fall where they may. We let the dice lay where they fall, and press on. Now, the challenge to a just run with it, it varies between these three, so I'll kind of give a breakdown. In the case of a Leeroy Jankins, he is going for it. He has a definite objective he's trying to accomplish. He's got a place he's going to, and he depends on all of the other players in the group to cover him. And while there are some persons who take on this Leeroy Jenkins attitude that are not explicitly trying to get themselves killed, nonetheless, there are a considerable number of them who don't know, don't care. The very mechanic of a role-play game is sort of lost on them at the beginning, and they literally think that there has to be an end to the game anyway, so I might as well see whether or not this weird physics rule that I've come up with in my head can work, or whether the game master is going to draw a boundary and let me know where the line is. I don't think you can look at the Leeroy Jenkins quite in the same way you can a Yolo, because in the case of the Jenkins in your group, they do have at least a finger on the pulse of what a game is about, what it is you are trying to do. And generally, the one thing that they are doing is impulsively acting. They're moving into the acting portion of it without thinking about without necessarily thinking about the role play aspects. I know there are veteran Leeroy Jankins. There are players who have done it many times with groups simply because they know that the game master has a soft spot for persona, and the action of a conflict is never going to be lethal. They're going to always be able to get away with the maneuver, whatever it happens to be, and they are pushing the story in a direction that at least they perceive is the optimal one for the group. Or maybe not. Maybe they're just doing it just literally to try to get themselves wiped out. But the point is that just running with it is fine for a while, but your players learn. And if for example, you're dealing with a Leeroy Jankins and you just run with it, pretty soon they're the ones that are just running with the story, because they know that you will, if they've discovered that you have a soft spot for characters and that you're not a murderous game master, and you also are trying to be as kind to the player as possible, that you're just going to accept it and press on, then those players can start to kind of run roughshod on the story that you're trying to tell. So in the case of the Yolos, they have a person who has a "you only live once" attitude in their character is that they want to see where the boundaries are. They want you to put up the walls so that they can figure out where they are, so that their next antics will be based on and driving those. For example, I had a character that had a penchant for jumping off of things. He was wanting to see, how far of a fall is lethal in the world of Nykos. Can you jump off of an 8-foot roof and land? Okay, good. So can I jump off of a 24-foot building? Okay. Well, now can I jump a 900-foot cliff? And each time the game master gives them feedback, they're building their framework of understanding. And in certain cases, if let's say that 923-foot fall, that you deal with a potentially lethal situation, you do determine that they've taken a bunch of wounds, that they're going to be laid up for quite a long time, and the player has to sit out and only recover for a period of time. Well, they learn not to do that thing anymore. So the benefit of the YOLO crowd is they really are just looking for where the frames are, because they couldn't get it from you narratively. They didn't quite know to what extent you were going to push it. In the case of the classic murder hobo, the idea of the adventurers being disjoint, disconnected, and thereby not having any limits to their morality, that's a completely different thing. In the category of just run with it, you basically get village. I mean, this is how the orphans get burned down in this story, right? That's just the fiction of it is, and the balancing reality is that the players have a desire to try these things because they want to see where your moral boundary is. They're still looking for the lines, as in the Yolos and the Jankins, but in this case, the murder hobos are looking for what's permissible. And before I move on to the next of the steps here, I do want to mention that there was a person that actually I found that I couldn't do the just run with it anymore. And let me tell you that story. It was more than 20 years ago now, almost. And the player was occupationally a minister of a faith community. Won't be so crass as to say which one, which type, but he was a weekly sermon giver, standing at a pulpit, warning people of impending doom and fire and brimstone if they didn't walk in a certain way. And in the case of role play, he literally came to the table with the intent of being a homicidal maniac. He wanted to experience all the different forms of destruction that one human being could visit upon another, and he did not have a care at all for local jurisdiction, local authorities, or any of that. He literally was trying to push the envelope, and because I had already at that point 25 years of games master experience, he thought that would be a walk in the park. And on the very first attempt at a morbid act, the local authorities did get clued into his attempt, figured out where he was, and prevented it, and in the process arrested him for the attempt. And the player came unglued. He explained that his life was so rigid and had so many lines and so many boundaries in his mind about what is morally correct things to do in physical life, that he was actually escaping to a fantasy world specifically to visit that darker, horrible self that he had in his head that had been repressed for his whole life. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't allow any player to pursue those ultra dark motives in a roleplay setting. I know that there are game masters that do. I know there are sandboxes that these type of players end up monopolizing, because there are no restrictions, no limits, no boundaries. And whether they become cult members or just traveling murder hobos, they're being done a disservice by a game master who would let them just run with it. So the next one we're going to talk about is slightly different response, and this didn't evolve immediately. This was something that came up a little bit further down the line as a game master. And where did it go? Oh, too much music here. I don't know why the city is on. I didn't turn that one on, but it's okay. But in the second case, the concept of stupid is as stupid does, there comes a time in a game master evolution that he's developed a story that he wants to tell, or he's got experiences and situations such as in a travelogue, or the players themselves have given limits and boundaries and restrictions of what they want to do, so that he can run a cast-based adventure. But in any of those cases, you've got to start setting limits for the craziness. The phrase "stupid is stupid as stupid does" come from Forrest Gump. The idea is that a person who decides to do crazy things is just crazy. You can't fault them for it. You can't be angry with them, but you can be disappointed and set limits to keep it from hurting anybody else. One of the most common things I'll do is I'll set a 3 or 4 session limit for the YOLO in the group. And I'll come back to the Jenkins in a minute, but in the case of the YOLOs, they really want to know what the foundation of your physics are. They want to know what can and cannot be accomplished. How much of a superhero are you when you are a adventure story hero in a roleplay game? Essentially, they fill the same role, right? The superhero is in the superhero movie, the star of the show, and everything that happens to him impacts him, and therefore the same thing would be true with an adventure hero. But is it a gritty Indiana Jones where you could fall out of a tree and break your arm, or is it a more silly Walter Mitty kind of the world's changing and modifying around the players, but they're not ever in any real danger? I think of the difference between a novel like Lord of the Rings, where there's death and destruction at every turn, and compare that with the Belgariad series, where the main character, Garion, is never in any real danger at the beginning. He's got people who are powerful enough around him to make sure that nothing untoward can happen. And when you're playing and your players don't know which of those frameworks you're operating, it almost makes sense for them to want to spend at least some time pushing limits and seeing what hurts and what doesn't, so to speak. And so utilizing the stupid is as stupid does merely as you warn them the first few times that doing such dangerous things can end up in traction or worse, and then when it actually occurs in game, well, they were warned, and therefore they take the ramifications. I believe I may have told you before about Dave, one of our players who was, he's not in my current circle, so all of the Daves that are friends with me, I'm not talking about you. This is a Dave from second iteration, and I haven't seen him in forever. Third iteration, actually. But Dave was so aware of his, in his case, more Leeroy Jankins than Yolo, because otherwise he would have already done the things that happened in my game. They were things that he had done more and more. And he was actually building a rule book for himself, and each time he would demise in the game, he would write a new rules. And they were usually colorful interpretations of what had happened. So, for example, in one case, he had discovered a weapon in a dungeon sticking out of a body and already covered with gore, and he decided to lick the blade. Well, that contact, he failed the saving throw, was possessed by a demon, and ended up getting himself demised by the party. And so he wrote a rule to his book, rule 27, never lick bloody swords. Weird thing to take from it. The idea of actually not trying not to expose yourself to cursed items is probably potentially higher on that list. But the rule that was got added was never lick bloody swords, and that level of comedy for him was perfectly fine. But he would come to the game sessions with what he called his golf bag, and it literally was a stack of 9 personas. And as his character would die, he would reach in his bag, pull out a different one, and head it to the game master and say, "This is what I'm playing next." And then the game master would weave him into weave that beginning into the game, and away we'd go. So this process, if you will, of stupid is as stupid does literally means punish the stupid. If they punish the crazy, crazy is what they say, beauty may be skin deep, but crazy's to the bone. Something like that. I may be paraphrasing, but the idea is that your game can be of a higher priority than that. You might want to consider stupid is as stupid does as the way to resolve that conflict. Interesting to note, stupid is as stupid does works really well for the first two, but does not do well for the murder hobos, because they are not generally going to the suicidally, I'm using that term in humor, minded direction. Instead, they are just pushing the boundaries to get advantage. So stupid is stupid doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but the next one. This is kind of important, and this is very much a Nikos focused rule, and it's based on an old joke. I'm going to be using faith communities as the motif of the joke of the story, not making any kind of moral implication, but a priest and a rabbi and a minister from a Protestant faith go out fishing one day, and the priest and the rabbi have known each other for years and years, but the minister is a new addition to their group, and so as they get going in their little fishing trip, they load onto a little dinghy and go out into the water to do the fishing. Well, after a few minutes, the rabbi says, "Oi, I forgot to grab the soft drinks. I'll go get them." And he gets out of the boat, walks across the surface of the water, grabs the sodas, walks back across the surface of the water, gets back in the boat. Not to be outdone, a few minutes later, the priest goes, but I forgot the snacks too. So now we got drinks, I should get us some snacks. So he also gets out of the boat, walks across the water, gets the snacks, walks back across the water, gets back in the boat. Nonplussed, the preacher's taking this completely normal, says, "Yeah, well, I forgot my life preserver." So he steps out of the boat and immediately plunges into the water up to his neck. As they're fishing him out and getting back into the boat, the priest says to the rabbi, "Suppose we should have told him where the rocks were?" You see, an adventure world can have pitfalls that are absolutely dangerous. They can have story bits that are lethal to the players for interaction. But if you build a map of where the rocks are, then the players can go ahead and do a little bit of Jenkins, a little bit of Yolo, and get away with it. Now, where the rocks are is particularly good for handling the third category, these murder hobos, because generally speaking, you can make it so that the local authorities happen to be Johnny on the spot. They wander around your community in packs, hoping for somebody to break a law. And thereby you can have your hobos determine that they'll only go to the extremes when they are actually far afield, which is fundamentally where the action should be anyway. So using a where the rocks are mentality, being loosey-goosey in most cases, but holding the line on some very key positions will help you moderate and control these. In the case of the Jenkins, where the rocks are sometimes doesn't matter to them, but then again, you might be bailing your Jenkins out on a semi-regular basis if he gets engaged in criminal behavior because of it. And your Yolos, that's really all they really wanted. Where the rocks are is really what they were looking for. Where's the line where what I do is ludicrous and silly, and where is it that I can actually test myself? When you get done with the rocks are, and you're deciding that maybe you've gotten too many lines and boundaries and you've forced limitations somewhat, then I tend to turn to more of a Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka for the phrase, "a little nonsense now and then is relished by the wisest men." If you're running an ultra serious campaign and all of a sudden somebody goes Leeroy Jankins and it's a hoot and it's thrilling and it's silly and the person gets into ridiculous trouble and the local police are acting like the Keystone cops and are slamming into themselves trying to catch them, it's okay. That little nonsense every once in a while is a press release, a pressure release. It's a press release. Wow. In our political climate today, having a press release be a little nonsense now and then, that's chef's kiss there. The idea of a little bit of levity periodically not even rhythmically, but just once in a while is a good thing, especially if the campaign is one where they need to be ultra focused at some point, and so you can release the pressure a little bit early by having a little nonsense. Generally, this is something that happens, and I hope my players aren't listening, because sometimes this happens when I'm personally not prepared. I haven't built the story for this week. I haven't really dedicated where they are and what's going on, so I'm a little loosey-goosey on the situation, and therefore the adventure gets silly. Recently, for example, one entire session, we were just over the line, if you will, in a beyond the looking glass scenario, and they got to meet several characters from the aforementioned Lewis Carroll novel, and it was comical. It was interesting because many of the players were young enough that they didn't even know who he was. There were a couple of my Gen X and even Gen Alphas that never even heard of Alice and didn't know who Tweedledee and Tweedledum were, and it was refreshing to release that pressure, because my older players got an internal laugh, kind of like being the adults watching a children's cartoon in modern time. But pardon me, a little nonsense actually can be dangerous in the case of the Jenkins, because the Leeroy Jankins are always looking for opportunities to press the border, and when they find the border a little spongy, bye-bye. You're going to be pursuing them for the next several parts of the adventure as you're trying to rein them back in, because they found a soft spot. They're gonna maximize on it. The other groups aren't so bad. The Yolos, generally speaking, are pretty much in tune with what, as the saying goes, they're picking up what you're laying down, so you don't have to worry about the Yolos too much. They're already kind of regulated by that point. And your murder hobos are ultra cautious, because whimsy is their kryptonite and their quicksand, so they have to be ultra careful in those situations of you being loosey-goosey. So it's interesting that they actually end up being the regulators in those moments, because this is not their hunting ground. This is something else. The irony is that once you've developed this idea of a little nonsense now and then, you are automatically self-regulating, so you don't have to hold the boundaries anymore. And you can, especially now if you've got several veteran characters and the new guy is the only real YOLO threat you've got, you can take on the next concept here, and that's the if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The idea is that the adventure story is resilient enough that if the players go off the reservation for a session or two and get themselves in some hot water, there's enough ineptitude and politicking that can go on that the players do not end up in a full TPK level shooting gallery. They're not on the firing line. They're able to work through it. Furthermore, this also applies to not so much the Jenkins, but definitely the Yolos. If they are trying to find the boundaries, and it's not going to destroy the adventure to let them do something, sure, let them attempt it. There's ways to repair, there's ways to heal, there's ways to regain your lost armor and such. So don't feel like it's a tough situation. But having said all of that, in the era of NycosRPG, what I have found works the best is the concept of the injunction. Now, the injunction is one way of saying it. The players usually hear it as the phrase enjoined. And enjoined are those individuals that are compelled to be part of a ruling that is an injunction. And in this case, the injunction, as defined, is the agreement that was made at some point in the past between the powers that be in the world of Nykos and the people of our real Earth. And that injunction states that when you become a persona in a NycosRPG session in the world of Nykos, then you are one of the predicted and foretold champions of the world, and that level is called the Enjoined. And if you are a member of the Enjoined, then not only do your family members and the local community and even the world recognize your role as a champion, but your player characters or their persona can see that about you. I don't go into detail of what that means, what it looks like. I just refer to it as something that is easily sensed and able to be reacted to, so that the person who's stepping into the role realizes that the actions that he takes in game are actually occurring to a person in game whom they are controlling. And it's much more than that, because they're seeing through that enjoined eyes. The actions that they take will have lasting ramifications on the being, and they actually can cause the demise of the enjoined if it gets too far. And simply by having that discussion about the meta play, how it is that you as a player are interacting with the persona in the world, has almost completely eliminated the murder hobos in my campaigns. Part of it is because they know they've got relatives that actually can find them and care for them. They are aware that there are people who are already their enemies built into the world, and so they have to mind their P's and Q's a little bit more. And generally they are located, so they have a home base, whether it be on a moving vessel, such as on board an airship or a seagoing vessel, or if it's a physical home, or even if it's just a community, such as a tribal group that moves around or whatever. Those are all establishable homes, and therefore the concept of the murder hobo is fundamentally eliminated, because they do hold accountability in a specific locale, which prevents it. The injunction furthermore gives the YOLO the time to play through what's going on and realize there is a one-to-one correlation between what the player does and the potential injuries they might sustain in the game, and thereby dampens their ardor for doing the really crazy things. And then finally, Leeroy Jankins, to paraphrase a bit, Leeroy Jankins you will have with you always. There are going to be people that push the envelope because they're enthusiastic, because they have an agenda, or because they want their name up in lights. In any which way, Jenkins can be moderated somewhat, because he's already getting the glory that he's looking for in the injunction. He's going to be fawned over by his family members and pumped up by the public, because they know how important the persona are, the enjoined are to the world. So now I've done that part, and we are coming up, we're actually just past a half an hour. I'm in my wheelhouse for the length of videos, so I'm going to be concluding. I want to thank you for being here and watching with me. If you've got any comments you'd like to add, make sure you put those in the comment section below. And let me know, how do you handle the Leeroy Jankins of the world? What is your take on a person with a YOLO complex? And then finally, how did you quell the murder hobos in your campaign? Share that information with me. I'd love to have a great conversation about those subjects. If you like what you see, make sure you follow us on Twitch. We broadcast every day of the week at 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. each day. So this is the last broadcast for this week. Do watch for upcoming live stream series, which will be on, I believe it'll be on Saturdays in the future. But if you want to be a participant in the world of Nykos, if you are in the local area of Redlands, California, we are at Board Games Paradise on State Street. We are there Mondays and Tuesdays from 6 p.m. Pacific until 11 p.m. I'm sorry, till 10 p.m. Pacific. And we're also there on Saturdays with the newly minted roleplay roulette using the new master book. And speaking of that, there's going to be a pre-released version of that. If you are interested in that, PM me directly, and I will tell you how you can get a hold of a copy of the pre-released version. Now that will be the NycosRPG mechanism as defined for general roleplay, and it is text only. I haven't added any graphics to it except for the cover of the book. And so if you want information on that, leave a message at NycosRPG.com. If you want to know more about the lore of Nykos and don't want to dip your toes quite into the adventure yet, you can also check out NycosRPG.info, INFO. That's my World Anvil page that has a lot of the lore of Nykos. Feel free to dig around in there. It's kind of like an excavation. The interconnections are spotty because I haven't been spending as much time on that property as I need to, I suppose. And finally, if you want to become a part of our community and help us to promote the message of NycosRPG and myself as Game Market Guru, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Nykos. Patreon is a sourcing mechanism for people who like artists and the stories they tell to become a part of that community. And in doing so, you would earn access to be a player in our Patreon-only games on Saturdays and Sundays. Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific time and Sundays at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And there's a lot of exciting stuff going on. Also watch for our Nykos nightly news episodes, because that's where I go into the updates on what each group is involved with and what shenanigans they're getting into in the world of Nykos. I want to thank you for adding to my half century of making stuff up by being here today, and I hope the insights that I provided have been helpful to you as a game master in finding ways to handle and deal with your Jenkins, Yolos, and murder hobos. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this has been NycosRPG. Have a great night.